Munson Jam Tracks and Munson Music Live, and we're going to talk about some different ways to kind of solo over an A blues progression, kind of a very typical A 12-bar blues. Now you could just kind of back this up with the chords, actually kind of working A7s, D7s, or D9s, kind of for your Ds, and then we're back to A's, actually, through the progression, kind of working that 12-bar. And then we'd be going to an E7 or an E9 chord, and then kind of a D7, D9, and then A7. And then we kind of top it off with kind of an E7 at the end. So all our chords are dominant 7 chords. We're going to talk about some easy ways to solo over this and then kind of get more and more chord specific. But we could start out with just a minor pentatonic scale, which is a very typical scale to kind of use over an A blues, where you can do pattern number 1, and I love pattern number 1, where we kind of start from the 5th fret on the low E string, and then we go to 8th fret on the low E, then 5-7 on the A string, 5-7 on the D string, 5-7 on the G string, and then 5-8 on the B string, and then 5-8 on the high E string. So we're really kind of playing A's and C's, D's and E's, G's and A notes, which can sound really, really good over this progression. That's something I call pattern number 1 if you're kind of working it in that place. Now, there's lots of other places to play those notes, and actually there's a couple different ways to kind of approach this, but one way is something I call one note per string, kind of as an idea, where you could take all the 5th frets and just kind of play those notes straight across, just to kind of get used to where those notes are on the guitar. And then the next piece of the pentatonic would kind of be that 8th, and then 7, 7, 7, and then 8, 8, kind of straight across the guitar. So that would be kind of cool to kind of just jump into those notes. And then our next piece, then we'd be going to 10th fret, and then 10, and then 10, and then we have 9, and then 10, and then 10. So you kind of play the scale, but just going straight across, just to kind of get used to where those notes are. And then our next piece is all the 12s. Our next piece we'd be going to 15, 15, and then 14, 14, and then 15, 15. And those are actually the same notes that you would have on 3, 2, or 3, 3, 2, 2, 3, 3, kind of 3rd fret twice, 2nd fret twice, 3rd fret twice. So kind of that G, C, E, A, D, G note. You can kind of work in either place. Then we be back to kind of where we got all the 5s that are part of it, or all the 17th frets are the same notes as the 5th frets, depending on where you are. Now another way to approach these patterns is to kind of work them as 2 note per string. So kind of taking that pattern 1 idea, we were kind of doing for the 5 and 8, and taking that idea and then moving it through the other patterns. So you could kind of work it as 8, 10 on the low E, and then 7, 10, 7, 10, 7, 9 on the G, 8, 10 on the B, 8, 10 on the high. Same notes, different place, and that's called pattern number 2. You're kind of working that pattern across the guitar. So you want to kind of practice just pattern 2 ideas. And then our next piece is pattern number 3, and we kind of have 10 to 12 on 3 strings, and then we got 9 to 12 on the G, 10 to 13 on the B, and then 10 to 12 on the high E. stay in that pattern too. And then our next pattern would be pattern number 4. We have 12 to 15 on 2 strings, 12 to 14 on 2 strings, and then we have 13 to 15 on the B, and then 12 to 15 on the high E. So you can kind of look at just that one little piece of the neck. And then our last pattern, this is one of my favorite patterns, sometimes calls this the butterfly pattern, but pattern number 5, you'd have 15 to 17 on 2 strings, 14 to 17 on 2 strings, and then 15 to 17 on 2 strings. So that's kind of a cool pattern to have under your fingers too. And then from there, we'd be back to our pattern number 1. Kind of that 5/8 now is 17 to 20. Oh my gosh. So 19, 17, 19, 17, 19, 17, 20, 17, 20. So that could be a cool thing to kind of explore all those patterns, kind of getting them under the fingers. Or there are all kinds of licks you can work in just that very first pattern that we were kind of playing around with. And a lot of these I kind of explored in the A7 video of these, but just kind of a recap. You can do kind of the hammer-on idea through this pattern. It's kind of a lick idea or little words to say. Or you can do pull-offs. Or you could work slide ideas, kind of working through the pattern. And I'm just taking pattern 1 as an example, but you can really do these licks in any of those patterns just to kind of play around the neck. Or you can work bends, and actually this is a very big thing in blues. And especially from C notes, actually. You can get the C note to bend into a C sharp. And that's kind of your blues third, kind of a flat 3 to a third kind of an idea. And that's a very cool, effective lick, especially if you play the root right after it. Kind of an 8th fret bend on the high E. Then I'm letting it come down back to the 8. Or you could do that same idea but from different C notes. So you could even take the G string on the 5th fret, it's kind of a bend idea, and end up on the D7. Or you can even take that idea and kind of work it as a hammer-on, even kind of working that G string on the 5th fret to kind of a 6th fret G, and then kind of hitting the A. So kind of a C, C sharp, A. Organize these notes in different ways, and there's lots of ways to kind of do this, almost like grammar ideas. But you could kind of work the low E string to the 8th fret on low E, and then go to the A string 5th as kind of a 3-note idea, kind of a 1, 2, 3. And what I like to do is something called patterns of 3. It's kind of like up 3 notes, and then you go back to the low E on the 8th fret, and then do another 3 notes in the scale. It's something I'll call patterns of 3, kind of grouping the scale 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. It's kind of an idea. Or from the top, it sounds really good too. So that could be a cool idea to kind of work patterns of 3. Or you can even kind of expand on that, kind of patterns of 4, kind of up 4 notes. And it's almost like you're going up 4 and dropping a string. So it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, and then back to low E8. Back to the A string on the 5th. So you can kind of group everything into kind of 4 notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. That'd be cool licks to play around with. Or something else that I like to play around with is something I call 1 note per string. And actually, this is kind of going back to where we were we're doing all the fifths across to kind of work pattern 1. And then our 8, 7, 7, 7, 8, 8. That's kind of the second note of the pattern, right? So we got kind of first notes of the pattern on the 5th frets, second notes of the pattern kind of working the other part of the scale. And you can make a rule for yourself that you're just going to play one note per string. So we just kind of did that, just kind of going straight across. But then you could group it into an idea in the pattern. So you could do first note and then the second note, and then go across the guitar that way. Kind of first note, second note, first note, second note, first note, second note. Kind of a zigzag through the pattern. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Or you could reverse that idea, kind of a 2, 1, second note, first note, second note, first note idea. 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. That kind of an idea. Or you could group them into groups of 3s. So you could do kind of a 1, 2, 1, and then go back to the A string 1, 2, 1, back to the D 1, 2, 1, back to the G 1, 2, 1, and then kind of work it that way. Kind of 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 1. Or you could do a 2, 1, 2. Kind of have the second note, first note, second note. Back to the A, second note, first note, second note. Back to the D, second note, first note, second note. Back to the G, second note, first note, second note. So I got a 2, 1, 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 1, 2. Or you could do a 1, 1, 2, kind of 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2 idea. 2, 2, 1 idea. Because it kind of gets you skipping through the scale. Might be kind of cool licks to play around with. Or rhythm ideas can be very cool too. Actually working 2 notes on each note through the scale. Kind of an 8th note idea, and I'm swinging that because it's bluesy. So kind of thinking long shorts through that. Long, short, 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 long, short. So kind of a swing 8th note idea. If you were going to do it straight, you could too. That's definitely more interesting to swing it. Or you could group 3s, and that's almost kind of like the backbeat of the blues. It's kind of a division of 3, kind of triplets. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, kind of an idea. Or you could do 4s. Or any subdivision you can think of. You could try to divide things into 5s or 6s, or just playing against the beat sometimes. So that might be kind of cool too, to kind of play around with some rhythms. And really could take all those scale ideas and just kind of see what you can say in the scale. And especially if you're new to this, I just take that first pattern and just kind of get used to that. And a lot of times you can kind of internalize what sounds you're going to get where. Trying bends, hammer-on pull-offs, pull-off hammer-ons. Just to kind of try and say some stuff in the scale. Another lick that could be cool is double stop, where you play the 2 notes at the same time. There's lots of different places to kind of do that, especially when you go into the other patterns. So you want to take all these ideas and try and pattern 2 or pattern 3. of weight through the scale. Now normally blues, we're kind of playing a minor pentatonic scale over a dominant 7 chord. So there's a conflict between the chord and the scale. Like we were kind of talking about the flat 3 to 3rd, or the C to C sharp note going to the A note. And so you could even work a major pentatonic scale over the blues. And this will sound really happy and you're kind of playing against it, but just to throw it out there as a possibility. If you took your pinky and kind of lined them up on the A note on the low E string, that's where our pattern one would line up for a major pentatonic scale. So then we'd be working 2nd fret to 5th fret on the low E, 2nd to 4th on the A, 2nd to 4th on the B, 2nd to 4th on the G string, 2nd to 5th, and then 2nd to 5th on the high E. So now all of a sudden it sounds really happy. But all those same licks could work. And actually something else that could be kind of cool is filling in the spaces actually. With little chromatic ideas actually where you don't skip any notes in between. And sometimes those are called chromatic passing tones or CPTs. It's like you're kind of using the notes in between the notes to point to the other notes of the scale. Open up the doorway. Oh my gosh, anything will work over A blues, and it will. But it's a lot of times it's what notes you're pointing to. Kind of a rival point idea is kind of through the scale. So you may want to play around with the major pentatonic, and actually all those patterns would just move when we kind of move things around that way. So now your pattern 2 starts from 5th, pattern 3 starts from 7. Starts from 9. And pattern 5 starts from 12. And we're back to pattern 1. Up between the major and the minor. Back to major. Minor pentatonic. Up between those ideas too. Something else you may want to think about too is while you're on that scale, it's a little weird, but we're kind of an A7 blues. So an A7 chord in general normally comes out of one major scale, which is a D major scale. So if you took the D note on the low E string, you could kind of work a D major through this too, and this will sound very, very happy, but kind of D, E, and F sharp, kind of 10, 12, 14 on the low E, 10, 12, 14 on the A string, and then 11, 12, 14 on the D, 11, 12, 14 on the G, and then 12, 14, 15 on the B, and then 12, 14, 15 on the high E. It's kind of your D major scale. So you got a D, E, F sharp, and then a G, A, B, and then a C sharp, D, and an E, and an F sharp, and a G, and an A, and a B, and a C sharp, and a D, and then an E, and an F sharp, and a G. So we got kind of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4. Kind of that do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Which could work over the scale too. And actually all those same pattern ideas you could use in that scale too. kind of a cool thing to do too. And normally that scale is kind of our ruler for a lot of things. Actually, kind of that. You thought of it as kind of numbers, kind of that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. Kind of 7-note scale, 2, 3, 4 on the top. You can kind of measure off just about any scale or any chord you wanted to, kind of using that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. And the weird thing about the A blues actually is you kind of hear an A as a home bass note actually. So kind of that A note on the 12th fret in that pattern. Kind of becomes almost like a home bass note to the ear. And so if we took those same notes and worked them off that A we were doing on the low E 5th fret, we could kind of have another pattern to kind of play around with. And you'd have the A on the low E, and if we played those same notes, we'd have 5, 7, 9 on the low E for A, B, C sharp. And then on the A string, you'd have D, E, and G, and F sharp. Kind of same pattern actually. But then when we hit the D string, we'd be playing a G note and then going to the A note to have those same notes. And that's actually something called Mixolydian. It's kind of called a mode idea of D. If you're kind of playing a D major scale, but you're hearing A as a home bass note. So we could even word that as a whole other pattern actually, kind of that 5, 7, 9 on the low E. Same thing on the A, same thing on the D, but then we have 6, 7, 9 on the G for the 3, 5, or 3, 4, 5. And then we'd have 7, 8, 10 on the B string for the 6, flat 7 root. And then we have 7, and then 9, and then 10 on the high E for kind of that B, C sharp D. Would be kind of your Mixolydian idea. So you could really play around with those same licks there too. Idea for the chords that we're doing. So while we're on the A chord, you can use the A Mixolydian. While we're on the D, you could do a D Mixolydian. And while we're on the E, you could do an E Mixolydian. So this is weird because you'll be listening for where the chord changes are. Like right now we're on the D. And then we're back to the A. to kind of work it is if we took little pieces of that Mixolydian for each chord, we'd actually have the chord arpeggios going on, or the notes that kind of make the chord. So you'd have the A on the low E fifth, and then if you go to 9th fret, that's the 3rd of the chord. And then if you go to the A string 7th fret, that's a E note, which is our 5th. And then the 5th fret on the D is a G note. So that's kind of our flat 7, kind of 1, 3, 5, flat 7 idea, kind of from that ruler idea. And then we'd have the 3rd, and then the 5th, and then the flat 7, and then the root. So you could kind of follow that through if you wanted to, even through the pattern. Or you might want to try that across the entire fretboard. Actually, those are kind of fair game notes. So it can always sound good to kind of just work just the notes that kind of make just the A7 chord over the top of the blues too. So you can kind of find different places to kind of play those notes. Stumble upon some little shapes that might be kind of cool to kind of use to kind of punctuate things too. And a lot of times these kind of work off of some things called voicings. Actually, what a voicing is where the order you're stacking up chords in. So randomly, since we're in an A blues, if you play just an A major chord, you kind of have a big collection of roots and thirds and fifths for an A chord. And if you play just the G string, B string, and E string, kind of just that A and the C sharp and the E note, that's called an A major chord, kind of working root 3-5 as a voicing from the G string to the high E. So I'm calling out voicings from thicker strings to thinner strings, kind of root to 3-5 on the top 3 strings. And you can find little chords with that, actually, kind of taking the first finger going over the E and the B string on the 5th fret gets you an A and an E note. And second finger on the G string 6th fret is kind of like a little A major chord. So kind of working that 3-5 root now as a voicing. And then from there we could work off the B string on the 10th fret, A note, and you could add in 9th fret on the G for the 5th, 9th fret on the high E for the 3rd, kind of working as a 5 root 3. Thank you, ma'am. Kind of working from the root 3-5 to the 3-5 root into kind of that D shape, kind of that 5 root 3, and then it kind of starts over again, kind of a root 3-5, and then back to 3-5 root, and then you may have enough space to do 5 root 3. So like little A chords over the neck can actually be very, very cool. And you can even go and find those same voicings on different string sets. So you could go to the D, G, and B and try and find a root 3-5, and then a 3-5 root, and then a 5 root 3. It's gonna be very cool. Or you could go to the A, D, and G string for a root 3-5, or a 3-5 root, or a 5 root 3. Or you could go to the E string, A string, and D string. You gotta find those same voicings, kind of root 3-5, 3-5 root, 5 root 3. See the bigger picture here actually is something called the caged way the chords move. So you almost have like an A major shape in the beginning, but then if you barred on 2nd fret, you can almost kind of do a G major chord shape. And then from there, if you kind of barred on 5th fret, you have like an E major shape. And then if you worked off the D string 7, you'd have a D shape for an A. And then if you barred on 9th fret, then you'd have kind of a C shape for the A. And then if you barred on 12th fret, you'd have kind of the A major shape again, kind of coming back. So these little voicings that we're doing actually are kind of little pieces of that bigger idea across the fretboard too. So you can kind of go and hunt and look for little A majors kind of through the scale. Or we could add in our G note for our A7, because we're really playing A's and C sharps and E's, and then that G is our flat 7 of the chord. So it could work like little A7s across the neck. Some of these get a little weird actually. There's some things I call piano voicings, which are a pain in the butt on the guitar, but you could, just to go over them, you could have D string on the 7th fret as kind of your A note, 6th on the G is a C sharp, 5th on the B string is a E note, and then 3rd 3rd fret on the high E is a G note. So it's kind of a G7 or an A7 chord. Kind of got 7, 6, 5, and then 3rd fret. So that's a pain in the butt to kind of play. But that's how a piano player would kind of stack things up on a keyboard, kind of root to skip, skip, skip. It's really easy on the piano. The guitar, not so much. But we could look at those voicings. So your next voicing would be kind of the 3, and then the 5, and then the 7, and then the root. Wow, what a stretch. And then your next voicing would be the 5 and the 7, the root and the 3. And then your next voicing for the A7 would be the 7, and then the root, and then 3, and then the 5. So big nasty stretches. So what we do normally instead of using those voicings is we use some things called drop 2 voicings, which is where if you took that A7 we were on at the beginning, that 7, 6, 5, 3 kind of root 3, 5, flat 7 idea. If you took the E note, kind of that second voice above the root, and dropped it below the root, then you'd end up with a 5 root 3 flat 7 voicing for an A7, which is a little bit easier to kind of deal with on the guitar. And so we can use drop 2s, and actually this can be very, very effective, especially on the top 4 strings. So your root position would start from that D string, 7th fret, then you got 9th fret on the G, 8th fret on the B, and then high E on the 9th fret. So it's kind of like a little D7 shape. We moved up the neck. So you got 7, 9, 8, 9 is kind of the tab, but voicing wise you're playing root 5, 7, 3. Awesome voicing for A7. And then the next day you could work off the A string 10th fret, 11th fret on the D for the 3rd, 12th fret on the G for the 7th, and then pinky on the high E on the 12th for the 5th. You kind of have a 3, 7, root 5 voicing for the A7. And then from there, if you kind of do a little bar on the 14th fret to cover the 5, root, and the 3, we could take the second finger and kind of go to the high E on the 15th fret for the flat 7. Kind of a 2-finger drop 2, kind of 5, root, 3, 7. This works from 2nd fret and 3rd fret too. And then from there, our next voicing would be kind of be working the 7, and then the 3, and then the 5 and the root. So you can almost do that as like a little bar on 5th fret over the D, G, and B. 2nd finger on the G, 6th fret for kind of an A7 that way. So these could be like little words actually to kind of say things with. Voicings and work them on the next 4 strings down, kind of the A, D, G, and B. So now you'd have the root at 5, 7, 3, kind of finding over that voicing, and then you'd have your 3, 7, root 5, and then we'd have our 5, root 3, 7 that we kind of talked about earlier, and then we'd have our 7, 3, 5 root kind of voicing, kind of working those strings. Cool to kind of work on the next strings down, and then you can work it on another string set where you can do the E string, A string, D string, and G string and find those same voicings, kind of root 5, 7, 3, and then 3, 7, root 5, and then the 5, root 3, 7, and then we'd have our 7, 3, 5 root. So that might be very, very cool too, just to kind of work those for those chords. It can also be cool with the drop 2 ideas to kind of take those A7 shapes, and then when the D chord turns up, you may want to move all those up the neck to kind of get to a D note. So one way to do that is to take one voicing, like we're kind of working that root 5, 7, 3, and then when the D comes around, you slide that to 12th fret, kind of with the first finger for a D7 chord, and then we could go back to the A7 chord with that shape. And then when the E turns up, we can take that shape and then slide it up until we get to an E on the D string, kind of 14th fret. And then maybe a 13th fret to lead into the 12th fret on D7. And then back to your A7. And then we can slide it back to the E7. So you can kind of try and match those chords with the little shapes. So you can try that same idea with the 3, 7, root 5 voicing. And then you'd be sliding that to where the D is on 3rd fret or 15th fret fret on the B, back to the A7, and then we kind of slide to a E7 chord. So now first finger's on the, or D7, sorry, like on the D, so D on the 3rd fret B string, or the 15th fret on the B string, back to the A on the 10th fret on the B, kind of 3, 7, root 5. Then we'd have the E, kind of working the 5th fret on the B string, and maybe a little chromatic run into that D7 on from the B string 3rd, back to A7, and then A7, or the E7 at the end. So we could take another voicing. Actually, we could take our 5 root 3 7 for the A7, and then slide up the 7th fret on the G string is kind of the D7. So kind of working G notes actually for those chords. So the A note's actually on the G string 2nd for the A7. And then we got our 7th fret on the G is a D note for the D7. And then we get back to our A7 again. So we got 5 root 3 7 for the A7. And then we can slide that shape up to 9th fret for the E7. And then we might want to do like a little down slide to 8th fret to lead into that 7th fret for the D. And then back to A7. And then back to the E7. And then from there we can try our next voicing. So the 7, 3, 5 root, kind of working off the high E A note for the A. 10th fret's the D note on the high E. Back to the A7. 5th fret on the high E. So maybe kind of cool with 7, 3, 5 root for the A7. And D7 with the high E on the 10. And then our A7. And then our E7 with the E on the 12th fret, and then our D7, the high E on the 10, and then we're back to our A7, and then we're back to our E7. So it might be kind of cool to work those voicings that way, or you can mix that up, kind of the A7 or switch voicings, and then whichever voicing you're on, try and find a close voicing for the next chord. A7 voicing is doing craziness. But then when we get the D, then all of a sudden you want to be thinking D7 craziness. So kind of our D7 would drop 2s, and then A7 would drop 2s. And then our E7 would drop 2s. And then our D7 would drop 2s. Would drop 2s. So that might be kind of a cool thing too, is to kind of use smaller voicings. Or you could even mix that up with the chord idea actually, by doing arpeggios of the chords. So you could work just the low E string for the A, and then the 3rd, 5th, flat 7, and then the root. And then when the D comes around, work that arpeggio for the D. Arpeggio. Might be cool. E7 arpeggio for the E. D7 arpeggio for the D. A7 arpeggio for the A. E7 arpeggio for the E. So you can mix it up that way too. Or you could kind of get into some very stock blues licks. And actually, one of my favorites actually is this cool little turnaround you'll normally hear like on the last 2 chords of the 12-bar blues, where you could go 9th fret on the G string, 9th fret on the high E string, and kind of work it as a G, E, G idea, kind of 9, 9, 9. And then you slide that down 1 fret to 8th fret, kind of do that same idea, and then 7th fret, and then we can kind of hit our flat 3 to 3 idea, and then the high E on the 5. It's kind of working that flat 3 root idea, which can be very cool for the turnaround actually. Might be kind of a cool lick. Or you can break it up that way. So that might be kind of cool to play around with too, especially at the end. So you might jam out on the minor pentatonic. And then maybe do some arpeggios. Maybe on the E, you got the E7 arpeggio, and then D7 arpeggio. But then maybe you go back to pentatonic, or little pieces of chords. Play around with it too, kind of mixing up all these ideas actually can be very, very effective in ways to solo over blues progressions. Minor pentatonic, major pentatonic, arpeggio, pentatonic. Mixolydian. D minor pentatonic scale. That feels like I'm playing against it, doesn't it? But then the A. Arpeggio. E7. Arpeggio. Mixolydian. Turn around there. So you may want to kind of play around with all these ideas and kind of see what you can say with it. But I do hope that that kind of helps throw some ideas at you as to how to solo over some A blues. So feel free to take all these ideas and run with them any way you want to, and base your entire career off playing pentatonic scale across the entire fretboard. So good luck!